In our last episode, covering the races of the Warhammer Fantasy world, we delved into the heroic story of the High Elves, of the first Phoenix King, and of his famous rise to power. But the story of Anarion and the High Elves was also the story of their chaos-touched cousins, the Dark Elves. Raiders, murderers, slavers, corruptors. These were but a few of the labels used to describe them. Yet even these only scratched the surface of the depravity they were capable of. Welcome to the fifth in our video series on the races of the Warhammer world, where we will cover the Dark Elves. The weak elves of Ulthuan fear us, for our ways are the true ways. They fear what they cannot understand, and instead cower behind the lies of their false history. Fools and cowards, it is but a matter of time before we wipe them from Ulthuan and regain our rightful place as masters of that isle, and from there we shall take the world. Keris, Witch Elf. At the beginning of their story, the Dark Elves were not the cruel and merciless beings feared in the later history of the Warhammer world. After all, their uncontested ruler Malekith was sired by Phoenix King Anarion. The untimely demise of Astariel and the disappearance of their children left Ulthuan with neither an Everqueen nor heirs. Anarion then married Marathi, a sorceress he rescued from a Slaneshi warband, and she birthed their first son. The elven prince was a promising prospect. From his mother, he learned to command the winds of magic, and from his father, he learned the art of warfare and state management. Anarion's death meant that Malekith was a natural and ideal candidate to ascend to the throne, but this idea was not considered equally among the elven princes. When it came time to debate on who should claim the Phoenix throne, many of the princes of Ulthuan objected to Malekith's nomination. They proclaimed the nation was in need of a diplomat, not a warrior, and it required a king who would ensure an era of peace and restoration would come after the hard-fought wars against chaos. The Phoenix throne was not a hereditary entitlement, and in addition to these arguments, it was revealed that Anarion's children with the first Everqueen had been found alive. Since the throne of the Everqueen was hereditary, that meant Ivrain was Malekith's half-sister. It was therefore impossible for Malekith to become Phoenix King according to the council. After much fiery debate, it came to pass that Bel-Shinar of Tiranoc would rise as the new king. On appearance, Malekith appeared to shoulder this defeat with some modicum of grace. His ambition remained, however, and from the Isle of Ulthuan, Malekith sailed to new adventures. Even if he were denied the title of king, he remained a recognizable face of the nation, as he helped to secure multiple new elven colonies along international coasts. In the land of Elfinaven, the Old World, he encountered hordes of savage orcs. Together with the dwarfs, Malekith conquered and tamed the land, even striking a friendship with the Dwarven king Snorri Whitebeard. Another triumph, more glory for Ulthuan. And so Malekith moved on, ever seeking to prove himself as the true heir of Anarion. In the far north, deep in the dangerous, frigid chaos wastes, Malekith discovered a ruined and ancient city. No man, elf, dwarf, orc or lizard man appeared to have built it, and this greatly intrigued the young elf prince. The elf wandered into the abandoned streets and delved deep into the frozen structure to uncover what secrets it kept. Hidden there, forgotten by time, was an unusual crown, a jagged, twisting circlet of an unknown silver-grey metal, in the likeness of interwoven horns. The curious prince reached forth to claim his prize and placed it upon his head. Immediately, Malekith's mind was assaulted with impossible visions of the realm of chaos, witnessing the four domains of Khorne, Nurgle, Slaanesh and Tzeentch. The sight of that damned realm tormented him until they were replaced with more visions of the world in its totality. From Ulthuan to the jungles of Lustria, the chaos wastes, and even the far-off broken polar gates, Malekith could perceive everywhere and everything through the crown. But above all, the winds of magic blew most clearly in his mind through this mysterious artifact, and it granted him even deeper knowledge of sorcery. From this, his magical power grew immensely, as did his arrogance and self-assurance. With this circlet, he could master chaos, Malekith thought to himself, and spare Ulthuan from an ultimate fate of death. This was, of course, if only he could take the Phoenix throne. In Ulthuan, Morathi schemed bitterly in her son's absence, unwilling to forgive her kin for robbing her son of his birthright. The sorceress drank deep of dark, forbidden knowledge and dabbled in demonic pacts. By her direction, cults to the Sithari were founded in Naggareth. Nights of luxurious feasting, narcotic vapors, and obscene rituals to dark gods attracted followers, and more temples quickly spread to neighboring kingdoms. The scope of their influential power exploded. Phoenix King Bel-Shannar had no choice but to begin a campaign to purge these cultists from the Isle, and he accepted secret aid from Malekith as the prince returned home quietly. Bel-Shannar, with the aid of Malekith, besieged the capital of Naggareth, Anluk. During the conflict, Malekith discovered that his own mother was the primary orchestrator behind the Cult of Pleasure's infiltration into High Elven society. The cult could not sustain the siege and lost the conflict, with Morathi left at the mercy of the Phoenix King and her own son. She was sentenced to imprisonment in Tor Anrock, and victory seemed certain at that moment. Yet still, even from the shackles of captivity, Morathi whispered into Malekith's ear. The surviving cultists secretly built even more temples and sects throughout Ulthuan. They recruited and plotted patiently, awaiting the perfect moment to strike back. As the Cult of Pleasure grew to notoriety again, rumours swept elven councils, and princes began to point fingers at one another in suspicion. The Prince of Etain, having been correctly revealed to be a follower of the cult, immolated himself and his fellow cultists to spare himself the shame of facing justice for his transgressions. In the confusion of blame amongst the princes, another shock rattled Ulthuan. The Phoenix King had been found dead, with a note confessing his involvement with the Cult of Pleasure, dead by suicide in apparent ingestion of poison. The truth, however, was that it was Malekith's doing. As the council convened to name a successor to Bel-Shannar, Malekith put his name forward. The court was highly suspicious of him and branded him as the murderer responsible for the Phoenix King's death. Uncaring of their protest, Malekith rallied his loyal followers and asserted himself as the true Phoenix King. All that resisted his claim were massacred, and the prince swiftly made for the heart of the Shrine of Asuryan to anoint himself in the sacred flames. "I am Malekith, son of Anarion, the demon's bane. Hear my name and know me, the rightful king of the elves." Malekith, Witch King of Naggaroth. Upon entering the ever-burning fire, Malekith's body blackened and charred. His screams lifted high in the sacred halls and silenced the kinslaying. Hair, skin, and hefty portions of flesh burned away in mere moments. Unable to withstand Asuryan's judgment, he flung himself from the flames and collapsed onto the ground, smoking. Clinging to life, Malekith was carried by his disciples out of the shrine and to the safety of Naggareth, while word was sent to his mother. When news reached Morathi, she rallied her loyal cultists and escaped captivity. She ordered a simultaneous attack on Illyrian and Trace. The late Phoenix King's nephew was ruling over Tiranoc at that time, but was conquered from within. The prince was quickly made into nothing but a figurehead, as Cainthras stole direct control of the kingdom at the direction of Morathi. The surviving princes, not yet overwhelmed with attacks on their soil, held an emergency election and declared Prince Imric the new Phoenix King. In honour of his grandfather, he took the name Kalidor I. Ulthuan was plunged into civil war. In Naggareth, Alith of House Anar led a 4-year-long guerrilla offensive that peaked at the Battle of Dark Fen. The clash of rebels and loyalists at first appeared to sway favourably for Alith's shadow warriors, but the tide turned quickly at the arrival of a dreadful shadow streaking across the sky. Atop a black dragon corrupted by dark magic, the elf warrior Karanian swept across the battlefield and slew Alith's father. The battle had been won for the cultists, and upon Alith's arrival home to warn his family, he found them all murdered and the hall of his family in ruins. The elf was forever changed, committed to the pursuit of ultimate revenge against the elves he named the Druki, or Dark Elves. When Phoenix King Kalidor learned of the arrival of the Black Dragons, his own dragon companion, Maedrethnir, flew into a rage. 12 dragons were awoken by him and sent to Lothern to break a lengthy siege. The Dark Elves were effectively stalled, and the warrior responsible for the death of Alith's father was killed in battle, much to Alith's disappointment. he had wished to make Coranians suffer. To the north, the Dark Elves advanced into Illyrian, and were stalled as the High Elves rallied and forced Morathi to turn her attention east to Avalon. At the same moment that Ever-Queen Yvraine expended all of her power to push Morathi into a retreat, the Kingdom of Trace steeled their defence under the leadership of Prince Coradrel. Circumventing the coast entirely, an armada of Dark Elven ships made landfall on the shores of Kothik and managed to subjugate the entire kingdom under Helebron, High Priestess of Cain. In Safari, civil unrest reached a violent crescendo as Prince Thiriol's own daughter led a coup but was expelled and fled to Nagaryth. Death and war were everywhere in Ulthuan. Few reaches of the Isle knew peace during this dark time in Elven history. As the years went on, the Phoenix King realized that there was a suspicious lack of weaponry arriving from the Anvil of Vol. He travelled to the shrine only to discover that the High Priest, Hotek, was in alliance with the Dark Elves. Before justice could come to the priest, he fled to Morathi's cults to complete a secretive project. Together they created a magnificent set of pitch-black rune armour, forged from meteoric iron, and it was hung upon the scorched body of Malekith. The Witch King arose as an elite high commander of the Druki, and he set his sights upon the inner kingdoms. He marched with a wicked plan to dominate the entire Isle. Nothing was too great to risk for victory. If they could not take Ulthuan by force, then Malekith would march to the Isle of the Dead, unbind the Vortex, and unleash the catastrophic power of the Realms of Chaos upon the island again. The Witch King would rather end the world than live in exile. Send word out across the world. Celebrate and give thanks to the mighty Lord of Murder for delivering unto us his world-born son. We have been blessed, and in his name we shall bear our blades in readiness for his will, as voiced by his avatar. Hail Malekith, eternal Cain incarnate. Crone Helebron, High Priestess of Cain. Another decade of war raged, and the Dark Elves began to push their offensive into the inner kingdoms. Malekith found his moment at the Isle of the Dead, and may have been successful if it had not been for the soul betrayal that warned the High Elves of the coming ritual. Baratheon of Ular realized the doom that would come to all if Malekith's sorcerers were successful, and escaped to Safari to warn the mages. The dark spell commenced, and the greatest wizards of Ulthuan sallied out to stop him. Slowly, the Dark Elves chipped away at the protective wards containing the vortex. The sun began to set, and a final push was made to unravel the magic funnel. Laughter from the dark gods echoed as suddenly foul magic began to corrupt the Isle, as the eternally imprisoned mages intervened and wove powerful counterspells. The clash of magic was too powerful to contain, and it sent a shockwave of magical energy all throughout Ulthuan. The aftermath was so intense that the island all but sank into the ocean. Earthquakes shook the mountains, the sky cracked, and a massive tidal wave 1,000 feet tall crashed down onto Nagaryth and Tiranoc. In an instant, thousands of elves perished, and Ulthuan was left in ruin. We will never forget that which has been taken from us. Ulthuan belongs to me. If it takes 1,000 years, 10,000 years, I will claim my rightful place as king. I am the son of Anarion. It is my destiny. Malekith, Witch King of Nagaroth. Even as Nagaryth sank into the ocean, the dark citadels separated from the jagged coast and floated atop the waves, energized by the lingering magic. Malekith, with his broken army, and Morathi, with her exhausted sorcerers, retreated from Ulthuan into the north and west. Deep in Nagaroth, the land of chill, the Dark Elves arrived at a desolate new home and founded a new capital, Nagarond, the Tower of Cold. But the Dark Elves did not easily let the memory of the civil war be forgotten. Also known as the Sundering, it would live on bitterly in the memory of the race. Malekith's ambition burned as intensely as ever, and his defeat did nothing but make the Witch King even more cruel, more ruthless, and more determined. Who are they? They are sorrow, pain, misery, misguided souls bound to darkness, led by a damned prince who refused to accept his true destiny, and will one day suffer as no other because of it. They embrace chaos with open arms, and much of their debauched society is given over to worship of Cain, the Lord of Murder. They live in fear, comforted only by the lies they repeatedly whisper to each other as they nurse old wounds. They are terrible, seek them not. I will say no more. Lord Alasir, Elven Ambassador. The elves who settled in Nagarond were similar in physique to their High Elven counterparts, but they were much paler and had darker hair. With large, dark, oval eyes, they viewed the world with no small amount of contempt. They sneered and scowled, but they were curiously beautiful beings regardless. Both Dark Elven males and females preferred decorative armor in tones of gold, black and silver. To behold a Dark Elf was to view dread itself, but it was known that Dark Elven women were more often than not more terrifying to witness. The women were also the only sex to be permitted to wield magic, primarily due to Malekith's belief in the Prophecy of Demise, which details the coming of a firstborn son of noble blood who will slay the Dark King with sorcery. Wizards were never allowed into the Dark Covenant and were viewed with high amounts of suspicion and disdain. Nagaroth was a flat, frozen land with pine forests and shallow streams carving through fields of snow. What it lacked in good climate, it made up for in rich nodes of minerals near the mountains and plentiful game in the wilds. But the Dark Elves were not miners, artisans or farmers and detested the labours of civilization building. These tasks were beneath them. Instead, they enslaved their workforce from the coastal settlements they raided. In the early days of the capital's construction, captured High Elven masons were used to guide the slaves and build the Dark City around the Witch King's citadel. The inside of the capital was a place of sacrifice and bloody worship. Very few acts of debauchery, murder and thievery were forbidden by the Witch King, save for those that were inconvenient to him. Temples, mansions, slave pits and barracks surround a central structure called the Black Tower. The tower was not a mere fortress, but another city within Nagarond and the living place of Malekith's most favoured nobles, known as Dreadlords. The centre of the tower was reserved for Malekith alone, and no light of flame was permitted in these halls. In its founding, the Dark Elven halls were intended to rival Ulthuan in splendour, but instead became shadowy, haunted, dreary chambers. Even more ghastly were the council chambers. Upon the walls hung the visages of cruel, hungering gods with glowing, unblinking eyes. Always they observed the 100 council chairs with black bone and flayed skin. Malekith's iron throne loomed over the head of the table, but it was common for the Witch King to stalk the perimeter and prey upon his councillors, whom he was known to kill for even the slightest offence. Even deeper in the Black Tower was a secretive chamber known only to Malekith and his Black Guard, hidden from the ever-prying eyes of his mother and her countless spies. Outside the city proper, satellite outposts and smaller cities encircled the capital and other settlements like it. Nagarond was the oldest of all the settlements, but more cropped up as the Dark Elves grew in number again. To the northeast, Grond, or the North Tower, guarded the capital from any threat that might creep down from the Chaos Wastes. It was a palace of luxury, decadence, and the domain of Marathi. Further east, along the shores of the Sea of Malice, was Har Ganeth, City of Executioners, or the Cursed Place, and was the most prominent citadel of the Cult of Cain. Northeast, across the Sea of Chill, was Karond Kar, the Tower of Despair. It was also called Slaver's Gate, and held the most vast and most brutal slave markets in Nagaroth. South, on the southern shores of the Sea of Malice, was the chiefest shipyard of the Witch King, Clar Karand. The Tower of Doom was a massive maritime base that kept 2/3 of the entire Dark Elven fleet, but it was also a hub for the Druchii Beastmasters. Circling back to the south of Nagarond was Hag Griff, or the Black Crag, a city built at the bottom of an icy, shadowy canyon. It was the richest Dark Elven settlement, with the wealth of the earth from minerals and metals to even warpstone. But not all Dark Elven fortresses were landbound. The Black Arks were floating strongholds, serving as mobile seaports for the raiding Dark Elven fleets. Commanded by corsairs, their primary purpose was to hold the thousands of slaves seized by the naval fleets and transport them to the main cities. Each Black Ark was a unique creation and covered in eldritch runes that pained the eyes of any who beheld it. Every city, from the great citadels to the mobile Black Arks, were under the religious authority of cults led by the Hag Queens. worship was mostly given to Cain in bloody spectacles of living sacrifice in the most sadistic and twisted manners. Whole beating hearts were ripped from the chests of victims and flung into the fire, or their entrails draped atop the shrine as they lay dying, gutted like a fish. Since there were few weather changes in Nagorond, there were instead 4 seasons of worship for the Dark Elves, devoted to a goddess or god. The season of blood for the worship of Cain, the season of despair for the worship of Erith Kiel, the season of decadence for Athati, and the season of savagery for Anath Rema. The Dark Elves, fanatical and cruel, were feared far and wide, not only for their torturous practices of slavery and sacrifice, but for their horrifying armies that would come to raid, subjugate, and kill anyone that stood between them and their prize. More videos on the races of the Warhammer Fantasy world are on the way, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we will catch you on the next one.